New York Alternative Investment Roundtable call. I'm Robert Atkinson of Mirae Asset Securities Prime Broker, the moderator. I am very pleased to be joined today by U.S. Representative Patrick McHenry, Republican of North Carolina, and New York State Assemblywoman Nicole Malliotakis, Republican of Staten Island, for a conversation about the latest developments regarding the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and to Economic Security Act, otherwise known as the CARES Act. Congressman McHenry will discuss what is new in Washington, while Assemblywoman Malliotakis will discuss recent developments from Albany. Now, both legislators are very well positioned to update and advise us, and they're also keenly interested to hear your views. Now, I know that Assemblywoman Malliotakis speaks with Governor Cuomo on a daily basis, and I would encourage you, if you have any comments or questions for either one of the legislators, to use the box at the right-hand corner to get me questions, which I then can relay to our guests. We certainly appreciate that they were able to carve out this time in their very busy schedules. Now, before I begin, I do want to thank our sponsors who make this all possible. And Britt, I'm going to ask you to flip to the sponsors page so everyone can see our sponsors, please. Okay, so of course we have Alston Bird, Baker Tilly, Bloomberg, Deloitte, Grant Thornton, New Mountain Capital, Mirae Asset Securities Prime Brokerage, Kaya, the Department for International Trade of the United Kingdom, and the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg Trade and Investment Office here in New York. Let me begin with Assemblywoman Malliotakis. Welcome, Assemblywoman.
Hi, how are you, Bob? It's great to be with you, and I want to thank you for inviting me to participate.
We certainly live in very interesting times. So we get hit by a global pandemic, stocks plunge, businesses shut down, unemployment skyrockets, and I've heard some say that GDP could contract by anywhere between 15 to 30%. So we certainly live in interesting times, and I'm just curious to get your general views on all this, particularly given your perch up in Albany. So do you have any maybe general thoughts that you can share with us about the situation, and particularly how this affects us here in New York State?
Well, sure. And for those on the call that do not know me, I'm New York State Assembly Member Nicole Malliotakis. I am a current candidate for United States Congress representing Staten Island and Southern Brooklyn. And, you know, obviously we are in a very critical time for our nation, but in particular for our city and state. This pandemic has hit New York in ways that it hasn't the other parts of the country. And so from my perspective, you know, I have been working day in and day out over the last few weeks, delivering supplies to our local nursing homes, to our hospitals, making sure our first responders have what they need, helping, unfortunately, people apply for unemployment, helping some small businesses understand the PPP. And that has sort of been my daily occurrence from morning until night, focusing on that, as well as expanding the bed capacity, testing capacity, bringing in antibody testing to New York City, and working to try to jumpstart our economy as soon as possible and as safely as possible, and also get elective surgeries back on schedule. You know, right now I could tell you that the last few weeks, last 7 weeks, the New York State has received 1.7 unemployment claims. And that is a large number considering that we haven't received everyone's claims. In fact, you know, there's been a problem with the system and a backlog, and so that's just part of the picture here in the state of New York. And before this crisis, the state was facing a $6 billion deficit at the beginning of the year, and now it's projected to be approximately a $13 billion deficit caused by, obviously, a slow in tax revenue, And the state is facing a rather dire situation. The controller about mid-month, so a couple of weeks, will be coming out with a forecast, and then the governor and the legislature will have to adjust spending levels based on that. The governor's already saying that we'll probably have to do a 10% cut across all state agencies, as well as cut another $8 billion, probably mostly from education, healthcare spending. So it is a very difficult situation. What makes it more difficult is that, unfortunately, against the advice of myself and others over the years, the city has spent a lot of money. The state, I'm sorry, has spent a lot of money. And we haven't had a rainy day fund. As a matter of fact, if you look at our reserves, it's approximately $1.25 billion in reserves, which is very scary considering the budget of the state of New York is $176 billion. But, I'm one of the fiscal conservatives in the legislature. Unfortunately, I sit in the minority, and while we can advocate and push and try to stop certain types of spending and bad pieces of legislation that are costly, we sometimes have success, but we oftentimes don't have success. And so we are in the situation that we're in right now. The reality is that the state of New York spends a tremendous amount of money. We have to spend nearly double what the state of Florida spends, with having 2 million less residents. And the same thing goes for the city of New York. There's not much of a rainy day fund there. Whatever money has come in, the mayor has spent. And you're looking at a budget of roughly $96 billion, which is about 35% increase from what the spending levels were under Mayor Bloomberg. So that is, the bottom line is that, we don't really have the stability because we haven't been saving money for economic downturn. So we're going to be facing some hardships and some tough decisions going forward. I would like to talk a little bit about some of the immediate things that I'm working on in terms of relief, but I'm not sure if the congressman jumped on yet, and if he did, I'd like to give him an opportunity to speak first.
Congressman, have you joined us?
I'm on the call. Can you?
We can hear you, and welcome. You're
well,
all
thank
set.
You. Thank you. I've been on for a couple minutes, but sadly, my
Congressman?
You know which congressman this is?
It's call-in user 17, I believe.
Okay. So Congressman, welcome.
Keep talking.
Keep talking, okay? And maybe what we can do, Nicole, so we'll give the congressman an opportunity to weigh in on this. And first of all, I want to thank you, Congressman, for joining us. And maybe a word or two just for the audience's benefit. The congressman is now serving his 8th term as representative from North Carolina's 10th district. He currently serves as the Republican leader of the House Financial Services Committee. And I understand if his party were to retake the House, he could emerge as the next chairman of that committee. So he has extensive experience, obviously, in Washington. Among some of the initiatives that the congressman has helped pass is the RAISE Act, Reforming Access for Investments in Startup Enterprises, which was signed into law by President Obama, and it provides the means for startup employees to sell their stock options to private investors. He also authored the primary legislation to legalize equity-based crowdfunding in the United States, language that was eventually included in the Jobs Act that then President Obama signed into law in 2012. So again, Congressman McHenry, welcome. What
Thank
I
you.
did ask
Thank
Nicole was that given the backdrop that we have here, we're in the midst of a global pandemic. We see the markets being affected mightily. We're also seeing the core economy, the businesses shutting down, many of them. Unemployment has skyrocketed. And we're also hearing reports that GDP could contract by as much as 15 to 30%. So we wanted to see what your general thoughts are on these set of circumstances before we get into Q&A.
No, thank you, and thank you for. I think those should be foremost in people's minds right now. first of all, thank you for having me on with Nicole. I've got enormous respect for Nicole and her capacity, both as a state legislator and her work in running this campaign of hers. She's a very sharp operator, and I think she's going to be look forward to calling her a colleague going into next year. So thank you for doing this with Nicole, and thanks for having me on. So my general background, thank you for outlining it, is one of trying to get the best legislative results we can get, even in divided government. And it's a difficult time in Washington to see things through legislatively, but there is no good time in Washington to do things. There's no perfect time, meaning you can blame inaction on a number of different factors at any given time. But the point is, we need to make sure we get America going again. I'm proud to be a part of the President's Reopen America committee, and I've passed along a number of recommendations I have that would give people an assurance that it's safe to reemerge in society. But first, we have to have the data back up that it's safe to reemerge in society. Different regions are dealing with this differently, we get your governor on the nightly news just like you do. And with the same sort of mixed bag of views on how he's doing and how he's performing. But the point is, at this time, we got to make sure that we've got as best a response as we possibly can get for the people that we serve. And that is priority number one for us as public officials, for Nicole and I as public officials. But the first step here is making sure that we deal with the health issue. The health issue has become an economic issue, and what we're trying to do is prevent it from becoming a financial crisis. It is not a financial crisis at this state of the game, mainly because we have financial institutions that are well capitalized, and through the modest regulatory reforms for the financial industry that the President's brought, you've seen loans being made at unprecedented rates, and the confidence that lenders can get back to doing their job in our society, which is to be that important conduit and that important leverage in our marketplace for our economy and for economic growth, for the real economy. But let's understand that this has nothing to do with the financial crisis. The financial crisis was malfeasance by a few, both within the private sector and within federal housing policy that wrought enormous economic pain. This is pain wrought by the shutdown of our economy. And so let's understand that this is like a Superstorm Sandy coming through. This is an act of God. This is not malfeasance by someone. And so I highlight that because our response has to be bold, it has to be broad-based, and it has to be responsible. And that means that we've got to give a regulatory relief to those that need it, so we can get this economy back on its feet. And we need to have a bold tax policy so that people can get the relief they need to confidently reemerge and make investments to get this economy where it was before this voluntary shutdown of our economy because of the coronavirus. And I think we can do that. We have a push and pull right now about liability reform that I think is quite necessary for businesses to confidently bring employees back when the health metrics say that they can. And that liability limitation, I think, is going to be an important part of the package, this next package of relief that will be both for state and municipal short-term economic relief and provide the necessary and proper limitations on lawsuits for law-abiding citizens and businesses so they can reemerge coming out of this health crisis. So that's what I wanted to mention to you in terms of sort of the broad view here. And would love to have your questions, but I'll hand it back over to you, Robert, and Nicole.
Well, thank you, Congressman. And let's delve now a little bit more deeply into the CARES Act because I know that many of the folks on the call with us right now are owners of small businesses or employees at small businesses, and I think people are wondering, for example, what kind of lender can get a paycheck protection program or PP loan from? What kind of lender, I should say, can get one?
It's quite broad-based. So credit unions and banks can can receive the loan themselves or provide those loans for their customers.
Okay, and I know that we've seen this a lot on the news. We've seen that many of the banks state that they're not taking any new applications.
Well, there's ample money right now for the PPP program. We have banks, credit unions, and community development financial institutions that are providing loans, as well as fintechs. These are broadly available. If your own institution that you bank with or your credit union isn't willing to work with you on a PPP loan, there are plenty of other options, but you should primarily, your first response should be to go to your existing banking relationship and your existing lending relationship to access this loan. If that doesn't work, then you need to go to another lender. But money is still available, thankfully.
Okay, which is obviously good to know. So, what are allowable uses of the loan proceeds with a PPP loan? Could you clarify that for us?
Sure. It's mortgage or rent and your utilities plus your payroll. That is the calculation. It's a very, very simple set of confines for, yep.
And just to circle back to a point you were making a moment ago, so if let's say we've already applied for a loan but haven't heard back from the bank, should we file it again? What should we do? Because obviously time in many cases is of the essence. So what should we do? What would you recommend?
I think your financial institution needs to be more responsive to you and let you know how things are going. I would check back with your financial institution, and if they're not responsive, then you can go to another financial institution and apply.
Okay. Now, can I have both a PPP loan as well as an economic injury disaster loan from the SBA? Is that possible?
Yes, it's possible. They have different characteristics and different limitations on those loans. You could also have a loan that the Federal Reserve announced, a new loan program called the Main Street Lending Facility. You could also access one of those as well.
Okay, maybe for the benefit of our audience folks, the economic injury disaster loan from the SBA, could you talk a little bit about that, what that really means?
Well, the EIDL loans, the economic, the EIDL is the initials for this, the EIDL loans, have not been as successful as the PPP loans. This is the first iteration to make sure that you had short-term lending, small business lending that was done very quickly, just like in a disaster response. Like think after Superstorm Sandy, the immediate loans you could get out of the SBA, similar to that. And so that would be that was the intent. The PPP loans were directed at a forgiveness program, a grant that would be for payroll, so that people can maintain their payroll, and you could have employees maintain their connection with their employer, and therefore not go on the unemployment rolls. That was the intention of the PPP loan. The EIDL loan was about getting small business lending so they could float their way through this thing. The EIDL loans have not, the SBA has not done a very good job of getting the monies out for the EIDL loans. And so thankfully the Federal Reserve has this new Main Street lending facility that's going to be much, much better.
Terrific. And Congressman, I'm getting a question from the audience, and here's how it goes. the SBA said PPP loans were not meant for hedge funds and private equity firms, but why shouldn't a small business fund manager who is under stress to pay rent and staff, salaries, et cetera, be eligible?
I think it's really a threshold of size that becomes the political factor here. But the politics of this have gotten out of control. And so the intention here is to get people who, through no fault of their own, are facing enormous economic hardship, and to get them lending so they can get through this challenge. But unfortunately, the politics of Washington took that sideways, unfortunately. But the political optics question is really a frustrating question for any business to try to figure out how to manage that, because that's not how you should be managing economic risk, is through whether or not a politician's going to yell at you about it. It just doesn't make any sense at all. So yes. I share your frustration. Absolutely share your frustration.
Yes, and as I know you know, many of the folks that are on this call do have a connection with these industries, both hedge funds and private equity firms. So let's move on here and talk a little bit about tax credits and deferments. Are they available with respect to employee expenses? Are there additional tax credits and deferments available with respect to employee expenses?
Yes, and consult your accountant, because there's a significant amount of changes to tax policy that would be beneficial to many individuals and to many small businesses, and good-sized business, larger-sized businesses as well. So I suggest to you to reach out to your tax professional to get the details of that. But carry forward losses and payroll-related expenses, there are new provisions and actions that you can access.
Okay, thank you. So, Congressman, what relief provisions for retirement plans are available through the CARES Act?
Well, you can access your retirement, so you can tap that as a source of liquidity without the penalties previously assigned, and then we have an additional. You also have relief on disbursements if you are retired. So that would ensure that you don't have to take money out of a retirement account when stocks were down. And so those are the two changes to retirement accounts.
Okay, very good, very good. Now, Congressman, I have another question from the audience, and here's how it reads. My business has been severely affected by the coronavirus and business closures. I may be able to find financing elsewhere, but I will have to pay that loan back. Am I still eligible for a PPP loan if I can still get a private loan elsewhere that would not be forgiven, putting my business at a huge disadvantage to competitors whose loans will be forgiven?
As long as you're not a public company, yes, you can access the PPP loans without having to establish that you couldn't otherwise get lending. The PPP loan is focused on payroll and ensuring that employees continue to get paid. That is the biggest functionality of that program. And so the answer is yes, you can access the PPP loan.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Let's move on now and talk a little bit about the mortgage market, okay? Currently, the secondary mortgage market is facing significant liquidity issues. What discussions, if any, are taking place to review liquidity in the mortgage market? And in general, what is the long-term financial outlook in regards to the coronavirus as it impacts that market?
Well, two things. First of all, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, their loan portfolio continues to perform well. Ginnie Mae-related mortgages are more severely impacted. FHFA is really in between the two in terms of performance, and meaning people paying. mortgages are continue being made, and the GSEs continue to ensure that mortgages are offered in the marketplace. We do have a liquidity crunch with the mortgage servicers, however, and they have now gotten regulatory guidance that establishes how much capital they would have to lay out, and they've been provided a level of relief, but a great deal of clarity from the regulator of the director of FHFA has given them sort of a broad view of what their capital requirements are going to be in the short run. So we do have clarity there. The Federal Reserve is unlikely to create a lending facility for mortgage servicers, and so there is a greater deal of clarity now than there was 2 weeks ago for mortgage servicers.
Okay. And Congressman, I know that you're a bit pressed for time, but I hope that you'll stick around for 2 more questions from the audience.
Sure. I've got, yes, I'm sorry it took me a while to get in, so absolutely.
No, we understand. So here's a question from the audience. How are we going to pay for all this?
Who wants to take this? Pete, you want to take this? I mean,
yeah, that's a horrible and great question. Look, I mean, what we should have done is during hot economic times, we should have been wiser about our spending, and we were not. So we went into this we went into this health crisis, an economic crisis, with more debt than we should have. We should have been paying down the debt rather than expanding it. And instead of running a bigger deficits, we should have had a balanced budget. So it's frustrating that we didn't pare down spending when the times were economically most viable for that. But we're in this, and I think what we have to do is focus on getting through this the best of our ability, not overspend, but make sure that we don't face calamity, economic calamity, in the collapse of otherwise economically sound institutions like states and healthcare systems and businesses, otherwise sound economic institutions, and ensure they can get back to it. Now, that doesn't mean propping up states and healthcare systems and businesses that were economically not viable as of the first of this year. Those things, we shouldn't be fixing other problems other than trying to get people through these very tough times that they're in right now. And so let's not overspend, but we got to be smart about this, and that means that we're going to have sadly more debt. My focus, though, is ensuring that we get lending. So the Federal Reserve lending is not the same thing as Congress spending money. There is a high likelihood that the Federal Reserve will get paid back. And the spending of Congress, I don't think anyone's going to return money to Congress. That has not previously happened. So I'm more focused on lending to get us out of this rather than greater national debt and deficit, for sure.
Okay. Thank you. I have one other question from the floor here, Congressman, and it drifts a little bit from the topic, but nonetheless, I think it's an important one. 2 months ago, we had as our guest global geopolitical commentator Gordon Chang join us, and one of the things that Gordon spoke about was the growing rift in his mind, between the United States and China. And so this question goes something like this. What are your views on this topic, given the significant interrelationship economically and otherwise between the two countries? What do you see, or how do you see this relationship unfolding in the near term, especially given what's taken place with the virus? Any thoughts?
Well, look, at first I would say we're not going to know the origin of this virus for sure. And so whether or not this was an accident in the wet markets or it was a creation in the lab, and whether or not it was an accident or a purposeful act. But at this point, it's not relevant. The fact is that we've had 3 significant viruses come out of China within the last generation. So why in the heck are we allowing this to happen, and how do we address that? I think that is a fundamental question for the world to resolve, and global health requires it. And so that's the first issue. The world needs to be unified to say to China, clean up your act. We're not going to stand for this when you brought out something like this and lied to the world. But let's get to the issue of why did China lie. The Chinese lied because they're communists. Communists lie. It is in their nature. You don't hate the scorpion for being a scorpion. You don't hate a snake for being a snake. Communists lie, and they lied about this, and they lied about the time frame, and they lied about the magnitude of it, and they lied about their numbers and everything else. And why do they lie? Because they're communists, and communists lie. So the next question is then our economic relationship with China. We have to reassign and reestablish our domestic supply chains for important products like pharmaceutical goods, PPE, and all this other stuff. We have to do that for our own safety and security. And on top of that, we have to be more economically independent of China for the very reason that I established. They're communists and they lie. So why do we need to continue to engage with them and destabilize our economy? So that's how I'd highlight it. I think things are, the relationship with China is chillier now because of how they handle this virus, and because their traditional lying as communists. And I think we're going to have a tougher position vis-a-vis China for the coming generation, and I think that will be mainly good for our economic security and mainly bad for their economic life and welfare out of China. But then again, I got to be honest with you. I think China has gotten way too light a treatment as they have created such economic strength to our great disadvantage. So I think things are going to be chillier with China in the coming couple of years for sure.
Okay.
So Robert, if I can ask Nicole a question, since
please,
Nicole's still on the line. Nicole.
Nicole?
Hi, I'm putting my video back on.
Oh, good. So Nicole, before I go, I'd love to hear a campaign update from you. I know you've been focused on your work in Albany and your current job, but given the state of the virus and what this has done to sort of the normal human interaction, I know you're primarily focused on this response to the virus, but how's the campaign going? Can you give me a little bit of a rundown? Can you give us a little bit of a rundown and how we can help you on the campaign side of things?
Well, thank you. I mean, look, Congressman, I want to thank you for your support, and I hope to join you in Washington. I hope that we do flip the House, because now more than ever we need to have good leadership, particularly those who understand the economy and who want to push back against these attempts to make our nation a socialist nation. I was actually speaking to Bob beforehand, and it turns out that there are 3 members of the Socialist Squad that actually sit in the majority on the Financial Services Committee, and that in itself is very disturbing. But I think this has really shined, I got to tell you, it's brought this election to made it all more important. The leadership that we'll be electing in November will be the individuals who restore our economy, bring back American jobs. We can't have impediments. We can't have people that are obstructionists. We need to work bipartisan fashion together to achieve results, to improve our healthcare system. Certainly this has shown some flaws in it, but we have to be able to address a lot of economic issues that we're going to be facing as a nation. I believe that we have to have the willpower to do that, and certainly there are many reasons why this election was important before, but now more than ever. My campaign is going actually pretty well. Look, I ran for mayor of the city of New York, and I received 70% of the vote in this district, so we should be able to take back this seat. It was a seat that was held by Republican Dan Donovan, before that Michael Grimm, before that Vito Fossella. So we have an opportunity to take back this seat. It is important, whether people are Republicans or Democrats, I think it's important to understand that New York City right now doesn't have one Republican voice in Washington. And that is problematic for a real robust bipartisan discussion. There's no counter view to AOC in Washington. And so I hope to bring that, and hopefully New York City will be able to restore what has historically been its lone voice. But it's challenging. I mean, it's obviously a very challenging time. I can't have events. I can't have rallies. I can't have fundraisers. I can't do anything. So I've been trying to do as much as I can in my current capacity as an assembly member to assist my constituents, do conferences like this, and I've been doing them with various industries. Last night I did it with the Medical Society. Tonight I'll be with the home improvement contractors, because I've been working very closely with them to try to get both essential elective surgeries to resume in the state of New York, because we have many people who are suffering right now in a lot of pain, or they have preventive procedures that need to take place. And then on the other side, in terms of the economy, I've been pushing the governor to start with the construction industry, outdoor work, and we have to do that, I think, sooner rather than later. So I've been working with these various industries to try to address some of their concerns and see how we can move forward together. And we've been doing teletown halls with medical experts, and I had a town hall with Congressman Dan Crenshaw last week, which was great. We talked about a lot of issues similar to what you're discussing today, but not so much focused just on the economy, but on various topics. And so that's how I'm trying to engage with people during what has been a very odd election cycle.
Nicole, thank you. And if I may, can we pick up on where you left off? You were speaking earlier about the economic situation here in New York State, and I do want to thank Congressman Patrick Henry. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Honor to be with you. Thanks so much, and thanks for doing this for Nicole. Thank y'all.
And we wish you the best in the future, and thanks so much for joining us today. So, Assemblywoman, we were talking, or you were talking before, about economic growth in New York State. And one question I have for you is, how is the state going to continue to grow as it needs to when we have, I believe, it's negative population growth? People and businesses are leaving the state in droves. What do you think? What are the reasons causing the people and the businesses to leave New York State, and what can be done to change that?
Well, look, I think we all know the reasons why, and it's high taxation, high regulation, it's freedoms being stripped from individuals, and I think that there are you know, obviously elections matter, and that's the answer is we have to have people who are more vigilant in holding elected officials accountable, actively lobbying their elected officials on policies that reflect their concerns, and then just electing the people that really relate to your messaging and what you would like to see in your government. Last night I had a call with property owners across the city of New York. And they are obviously very concerned about this movement to cancel rent. And that, for any small landlord or any landlord at all, would be disastrous. I mean, obviously, they need to make mortgage payments. They need to pay their water bills. They need to pay their property taxes. And just like the city of New York has refused my push to temporarily freeze collection of water bills and property taxes so businesses and residents can get back on their feet because they need the income. They need to understand, government, that these landlords have bills that they need to pay as well, and they rely on that rental income to pay those bills. So I think that there is it is difficult because, as you know, in the city, we're under one-party rule. The state, we're under one-party rule, and as I mentioned earlier, in our representation in Washington, we're under a one-party rule. But we have to try to what we can to try to change that dynamic a little bit. And so we can start moving forward. I've been pushing the governor to look at regulations currently, to look at perhaps a sales tax holiday, to look at repurposing tax credits that he has used for a startup in New York, which has not been a successful program in attracting businesses and creating jobs and bringing revenue. And these are things that we should be examining as a state. It's difficult right now to do these things. We should have done them when it was better financial times in our state. But now, as I mentioned earlier, we were in a $6 billion deficit before the year began, and now we are facing a major shortage when it comes to revenue. Remember, where New York gets its revenue, mostly.
Right, and I think one of the things you and I have talked about prior to the call going live was the reality that this state pays more into the federal government than it receives in benefits. Now, granted, in recent times, maybe that's changed a little, but it does seem to be a constant that New York State, and I believe that's true of New Jersey and Connecticut as well, pay more in than they get out. What are your thoughts on that? What can be done to lessen the burden?
Well, for every dollar we give to the federal government, we get back about 91 cents. So I think the answer is twofold. We should be advocating for our fair share in federal funding, and that certainly will be one of my main agenda items when I go to Washington. We need to understand, though, that during this crisis, that the federal government has stepped up, the president has stepped up, and has given New York basically everything that we've asked for. And we have received, as a state, about $5 billion in federal coronavirus aid, plus other things. He sent military medics, PPE, the U.S. Navy comfort ship, and so many other resources that we did receive as a state. So I do take exception to the comments made by the mayor that the president's looking to stab the city in the back. I think what the president would like, and what I would like as a more of a fiscal conservative, is of course my city, my state, to get its resources that it needs, but there should be some restrictions. There should be some conditions in place. Because if you look at the history of the way our mayor has spent money, $850 million on Thrive NYC, which has been a disaster. They don't even know where the money is. $750 million on Renewal Schools program, which turned out to be big contracts with vendors and high-priced consultants, and that turned out to be a disaster as well. And the mayor has a history of spending whatever money he gets. He just spends it out the door on various programs, and then says, when there's hard fiscal times, oh, you want to cut our police, or you want to close out parks, or you don't want to have a fire department that is fully staffed. Those are the things that government should be spending their money on. And if we had focused on those things and put aside money then in a rainy day fund, we wouldn't be in the fiscal situation we are in now, where we're begging the federal government for some form of a bailout.
Pete, to you, Jonathan, Chicago, Illinois.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the city, and I think you were heading in this direction. I mean, obviously New York relies heavily on tourism. Can you talk about some of the non-COVID issues impacting our tourism, from the subway system, homelessness, public safety? What are these issues, and what can we do to correct them?
Sure. Well, if I can give a little more overview of where we're at in terms of just the economy and getting people back to work. The governor has put out a plan. It's a 12-point plan, but it really requires that regions meet certain levels in terms of hospital bed capacity, in terms of a decline in a consistent decline in COVID positive patients and hospitalizations. And the criteria, I think, is very tough for New York to meet in the New York City or New York City region, which would include Long Island as well, in the near future. And so as a result, we're going to see our economy really not starting. And that's why I've been making a push with the governor to, revisit some of this and say, hey, at least with outdoor work, let's start with that. We can start getting construction. Let's get people back to work in that sense. There's no, you can have a bunch of people at a park, and you can have a bunch of people at an affordable housing construction site right now. But you can't have somebody, putting a fence around their home or installing a pool or having their lawn beautified with gardens. And that makes absolutely no sense to me. And so I think that we need to revisit that so we can at least start getting some of these individuals back to work. Additionally, he's currently saying that upstate New York, Hamilton County has 3 positive COVID cases. They can't get back to work either in terms of even construction, like I'm speaking. And that's been one of my major pushes. Now, with regard to tourism, our economy relies heavily on tourism. And there are multiple issues here. Number one, we have the COVID crisis. Number two, we have a homeless crisis. And as you saw just overnight, they cleared 2,000 individuals who are homeless from our subway system. Living on our subway system without any protection, during a pandemic, that's how mismanaged the city of New York is. And then you have the public safety aspect. And as you know, I've been one of the big advocates to fix what have been very bad bail reform law that took effect January 1st. And it kind of went under the radar because of all that's been going on with the pandemic. But in this last budget that we just passed April 1st, we were able to get a lot of fixes, a lot of crimes in which we will now be able to have a judicial discretion to set bail. We were able to fix it, I think, more than I expected, to be honest. But that will be a good thing in terms of public safety, because all of that has an impact not only on tourism, but on who actually wants to live here in this city.
At some point, I don't know when.
So let's just go back to the economics for a second. How are we going to pay for all this?
Well, you either have, obviously there's taxes, debt, federal funds that may come in and help offset, and cutting spending. And I think there's probably going to have to be a combination of all of that in some way, shape, or I think that's going to require probably a combination of all of that, because that is how unstable we are.
Just hold on a second. So if it's taxing, right, aren't we saying one of the reasons that people and businesses are leaving the state and the city has to do with taxes? But then on the other hand, we're saying we can't have the homeless on the streets. We need a full complement of police. These seem to be contradictory goals and objectives. Something has to give.
Yeah, so I'm not an advocate for taxes, but I can tell you that that's what'll happen. They'll probably, you've seen that there's been a major push by the state legislators and the city council for a millionaire's tax, and the saying that, never allow a good crisis to go to waste is going to take hold here. They're already looking to change the way our city and our state functions, utilizing this crisis as an excuse to do so. I believe that there are areas where we can cut spending. I've pointed to a few of them. First of all, we're giving free college tuition to those who are in the country illegally. There are major tax credits being given to people to try to lure them from other parts of the country, when everyone knows that no one is going to come to New York unless we really revisit our regulatory structure and our taxes. So I don't think we should be adding to that burden, but instead looking to reappropriate spending. And then we're going to make tough decisions and have cuts across the board. There's no doubt, but there's places that can be cut. I don't know if it can make up the entire, we're going to have about $8 billion left probably to fill. And I don't know that the cuts that I would propose would make up for all of that. which is why the governor's now is looking at healthcare and education. But I think that there are things that could be achieved here to lessen the pain. And I think that what people really need to understand is that that's why it's so important to start getting people back to work, because we need that tax revenue. And the longer this lasts, I mean, now that for downstate, they're talking about possibly January. The first phase, which would be construction, manufacturing, probably for New York. Downstate would probably be September, based on the model that the governor currently has.
So Assemblywoman, one of the things that the governor, I think, stresses, and I think he, from what I gather, been quite effective in doing this, is that we need to rely on information and data. In other words, science, as opposed to politics, as we make these decisions. What is it that do you think he's being unreasonable in his approach? I mean, hasn't he said that we want to roll this out in stages across the state? What could we be doing that we're not in terms of how we use data and information to get us back to work and keep people safe?
Well, I've consulted with a number of medical experts, and the science does show that outdoors, when temperature, the ultraviolet waves, they actually do kill the virus on surfaces, and the transmission outdoors is much less than indoors. And that itself tells you that we should be moving forward with what I'm suggesting, with at least getting some of this outdoor economy, construction, home improvement started. And I think that even in the counties, as I mentioned, where there's 3 cases, the governor now saying we have to wait another month before we can allow any type of construction work. And I think that that's a mistake. So I think, of course, public safety needs to be paramount. But when you have a mayor that's closing down the streets and saying, you know, we're going to close down the streets so you can walk around and get some recreation, yet, you know, the golf courses are closed, you can't walk on a golf course, or you can't install a pool in your home, it doesn't really make much sense. And I would also point to what the governor's already doing, because there seems to be a discrepancy here. Affordable housing, we have construction sites currently operating in the city, upwards of 100 individuals at a site, and there has been no further transmission among those individuals. Okay, so we've already shown that we can successfully go about doing construction, particularly with much larger numbers of individuals, without it having an impact on the numbers. And so that is the argument that I can continue to make, that we should be starting sooner rather than later with the outdoors, home improvement and construction, and then try to reevaluate every 2 weeks. I think that's a really important distinction to be making.
Well, I think that's well said. And on that note, I think our time is about up. I do want to thank Representative Patrick McHenry and Assemblywoman Nicole Maliatakis for joining us on our May call. I think it's been very interesting, very informative. And I just want to call everyone's attention. On the screen in front of you, you have contact information. If you would like to speak directly with either Assemblywoman Maliatakis or Representative McHenry, you have email information in front of you, as well as Nicole's cell number, or I guess that's the office number. But again, I do want to thank everyone, and everyone stay safe and healthy and hopefully prosperous. And we will see you again next month for the June New York Alternative Investment Monthly Roundtable. Thanks again for joining us, and folks, have a great month. Nicole, be well, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you all. It was great speaking with you. And I have a resource page where I post regularly. It's like a blog that I kind of try to update on my website, NicoleForNY.com. And also, if you look at me on Facebook, you can see my pages where I update regularly on what I'm working on and other things that are interesting.
And for those of you that would like to relay specific questions or points to the Assemblywoman, please feel free to do so. I know one of her goals in attending this was to get input from this particular audience. So by all means, reach out to both the Assemblywoman as well as the Congressman. Again, thanks so much, and speak to you next month. Be well. Bye-bye.